The warm glow of brass sconces reflected off dark wooden panels as soft jazz drifted through the upscale Atlanta dining room. This was the kind of place where political donors, corporate lawyers, and celebrities came to conduct business away from prying eyes. Every table was set with precision, every glass polished to a mirror shine. For the staff, perfection was not simply expected, it was demanded. But tonight, something felt off. Near the entrance, the restaurant manager hurried in from the valet area, his expression tight. "He is here," he whispered, barely audible. A few staff members nearby stiffened immediately. "Who?" one of the servers asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. The manager lowered his voice further. "Marcus Devereaux." The name moved through the room like a current. A few servers exchanged nervous glances, while another muttered a curse under his breath. Just our luck. Everyone in the city knew who Marcus Devereaux was. By 39, he had built one of the most dominant tech firms in the country, a sprawling empire of software and data that touched nearly every industry. His wealth was staggering, his influence even more so. Magazines called him a visionary. Investors trusted him implicitly. Young entrepreneurs wanted to be him. But the people who worked in the restaurants he frequented knew a different version of the man. Marcus Devereaux was brilliant, yes, but he was also known for a temper that could turn a minor inconvenience into a public spectacle. One small misstep could unravel an entire evening, or worse, a career. The manager clapped his hands quietly to gather attention. "Listen carefully," he said. "Mr. Devereaux will be at table 7. His usual. Everything needs to be flawless. No delays. No mistakes." A young server exhaled nervously. Last time he came, he went after Kevin for bringing the wrong wine. "That was not even Kevin's section," another server whispered. "Does not matter," someone else replied. "When he gets angry, someone pays for it." The manager looked around the room. "All right," he said, his voice strained. "Who is taking table 7? Silence. Every employee suddenly found great interest in their aprons, their trays, the arrangement of napkins on the counter. No one volunteered. No one made eye contact with the manager. He exhaled heavily. "Come on. Someone has to do it." Still nothing. Then a calm voice came from behind them. "I will take it." Everyone turned. Standing near the service station was Nina Reeves, the newest member of the waitstaff. She had only been there a few weeks. Unlike the others, her hands were steady, her posture relaxed. She simply pulled her apron a little tighter and stepped forward. The manager hesitated. "Nina, are you sure about this?" She nodded once. "A customer is a customer," she said simply. "That is what we are here for." One of the veteran servers shook his head. "You do not understand," he warned. "Marcus Devereaux is not like regular customers." Nina raised an eyebrow. "Does he bite?" "No," the server muttered, "but he might ruin your entire future." A few nervous laughs rippled through the group, but the tension did not break. The manager finally nodded. "All right," he said, "but be careful." Across the dining room, the main doors opened. A tall man entered, his presence filling the space before he even reached his table. Marcus Devereaux wore a dark suit cut to perfection, his expression sharp and unreadable. A security guard stayed near the entrance as Marcus moved toward his usual spot without looking left or right. The staff instinctively stepped back as he passed. He sat at table 7 and pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages as if the entire restaurant existed only at the edges of his attention. The manager leaned closer to Nina. "Remember," he whispered. "Polite, quick, and stay calm no matter what." Nina gave a small nod. She picked up her notepad and walked toward the table. Each step felt louder to the staff watching from a distance. She stopped beside the table and spoke with professional ease. "Good evening, sir. My name is Nina, and I will be serving you tonight." Marcus barely glanced up from his phone. "Water," he said flatly.
"Sparkling.
"And make it fast." "Of course," Nina replied with a practiced smile. She returned moments later with the water and waited patiently while he continued typing. Finally, he looked up briefly. "I will have the grilled sea bass," he said. "Medium rare. Steamed asparagus. No sauce." She wrote it down quickly. "Anything else, sir?" He looked at her for a moment longer than necessary, as if assessing something. Then he waved his hand dismissively. That is all. Very well, Nina said before turning back toward the kitchen. Behind the counter, the other staff immediately surrounded her. Well, one waitress whispered. Did he blow up yet? Nina shook her head slightly. No, she said calmly. He just ordered dinner. The server who had warned her earlier looked unconvinced.
Give it time.
In the kitchen, the chefs prepared Marcus's order with extreme care. Everyone knew that mistakes involving his food rarely ended well. Minutes later, Nina carried the plate to table 7 and set it in front of him. Your grilled sea bass, sir. Marcus nodded without looking up. For a moment, everything seemed fine. But just as Nina turned to leave, he went still. His eyes narrowed at the plate. Slowly, he placed his fork down on the tablecloth. Nina, he said coldly. She turned back. Yes, sir. He pushed the plate forward slightly. This is not what I ordered. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. Nearby diners looked up. The manager froze. The staff, watching from the distance, silently braced for what was coming. But they already knew they were too late. In the next few moments, Marcus Devereaux's anger would ignite a confrontation none of them would forget, and it would lead to a revelation that would change his life forever. He pushed the plate forward again, his jaw tightening as he stared at the food. This is not what I ordered. His voice was low, but the irritation in it carried across the room. Conversations around them began to fade as nearby diners sensed the shift. Nina remained beside the table, calm but alert. I am sorry, sir, she said politely. Could you tell me what seems to be wrong? Marcus pointed toward the plate with the edge of his fork. I said medium rare, he said sharply. This is overcooked. Nina looked at the fish. From where she stood, it appeared perfectly prepared. But she knew arguing about food with an agitated customer never helped. I apologize for that, she said. I can have the kitchen prepare a new one for you right away. Marcus leaned back in his chair slowly, studying her face as if searching for something.
That is not the point, he said.
A few tables away, the manager had already noticed the tension and began walking toward them quickly. The point, Marcus continued, his voice growing louder, is that when I order something, I expect it to be done correctly the first time. I understand, Nina replied evenly. Marcus scoffed.
Do you?
The manager reached the table, forcing a nervous smile. Mr. Devereaux, I am very sorry about this. We will fix it immediately. Marcus did not even look at him. Instead, he kept his eyes locked on Nina. Is she new? The manager hesitated. Yes, she started a few weeks ago. That explains it, Marcus muttered. Nina could feel the other staff watching from across the room. She knew what they expected her to do. Apologize repeatedly. Try to smooth things over. But something about his tone stirred a quiet frustration inside her. She had done nothing wrong. The delay had come from the kitchen, and the chef himself had checked the dish before it left the pass. Still, she kept her voice respectful. I can replace the dish immediately, sir. Marcus suddenly slammed his fork onto the table. The sharp clang echoed through the restaurant. I do not want it replaced, he snapped. The manager's heart nearly stopped. Sir, Marcus raised a hand to silence him. This is exactly what is wrong with places like this, he said coldly. Careless staff who do not pay attention. Nina took a slow breath. With respect, sir, I simply delivered the meal prepared by the kitchen. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Are you arguing with me? No, she replied evenly. I am explaining the situation. The manager stepped forward quickly, desperate to stop the escalation. Nina, he said quietly, please just apologize. But Nina did not move. Something in Marcus's expression changed. He looked almost amused now, as if he had just found an unexpected challenge. You have confidence, he said slowly. Then his face hardened again. But confidence does not make up for incompetence. The manager forced another smile. Mr. Devereaux, I promise we will handle this. Marcus cut him off with a single sharp sentence. Fire her. The words landed like a grenade. The manager froze. I am sorry. You heard me, Marcus said. I do not want someone like that serving me or anyone else here. The restaurant had gone completely silent. Even customers at distant tables were staring openly. The manager shifted nervously. Mr. Devereaux, perhaps that is a little extreme. It may not have been her fault. Marcus's voice turned icy. Are you questioning me? No, sir, but I spent a lot of money in this place, Marcus interrupted. And when I say someone should not be working here, I expect that to be taken seriously. The manager swallowed hard. He knew how powerful Marcus Devereaux was. Losing him as a regular customer could cost the restaurant an enormous amount of business. He turned slowly toward Nina, clearly uncomfortable. Nina, maybe you should step away for now. But Nina did not move. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus. For the first time since the confrontation began, there was something deeper than anger in her expression. Something personal. Marcus noticed it immediately.
What?
He said impatiently. Nina spoke quietly, but every word carried through the silent room. You really do not recognize me, do you? Marcus frowned. Recognize you? She gave a short, humorless laugh. Why would I recognize a waitress? The words hung in the air. Nina crossed her arms slowly. For a moment, it looked like she was deciding whether or not to say something. Then she finally spoke. I never thought, she said steadily, that my own father would try to get me fired. The entire restaurant froze. The manager blinked in shock. Several customers gasped quietly. Marcus stared at her as if he had misheard the sentence entirely. What did you say? Nina did not look away. I said, she repeated, I never thought my own father would try to get me fired. Marcus leaned back in his chair slowly. Then he laughed, a cold, dismissive sound. That is ridiculous, he said. I do not have any children. Nina's expression did not change. Are you sure about that? Marcus's smile faded slightly. He studied her face more carefully now. Something about her suddenly felt familiar. But that was impossible. You are either confused, he said sharply, or trying some kind of stunt. Nina reached up and pulled a thin chain from beneath her uniform. A small silver charm hung from it. Marcus's eyes immediately locked onto it. The color drained from his face because he recognized that necklace instantly. He had given it to someone nearly 20 years ago. Someone he had never seen again. Nina's voice was calm, but her eyes burned with emotion. My mother's name is Rachel Bennett. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. The restaurant, the people, the noise, everything around him seemed to disappear in that moment. Memories he had buried for decades suddenly rushed back into his mind. And for the first time since becoming one of the most powerful men in the city, Marcus Devereaux felt something he had not felt in years. Confusion,
Shock.
and a growing, terrifying possibility. Because if what she was saying was true, then the young waitress standing in front of him was not just a stranger he had humiliated. She was his daughter. For several long seconds, Marcus Devereaux did not move. The noise of the restaurant slowly returned around him. Quiet whispers, clinking glasses, the distant hum of conversation, but it all sounded strangely distant. His eyes remained fixed on the small silver charm hanging from Nina's hand.
He knew that necklace. There was no doubt about it.
20 years ago, on a warm summer night filled with music and laughter, he had placed that same necklace around the neck of the woman he loved. Rachel Bennett? Marcus stood up slowly from his chair. Where did you get that? He asked, his voice suddenly low and unsteady. Nina did not look intimidated anymore. If anything, her confidence had grown. My mother kept it, she said. Marcus shook his head, still staring at the pendant. That is impossible.
Is it?
Nina replied quietly. The manager looked back and forth between them, completely lost. Mr. Devereaux, is everything all right? Marcus ignored him. His attention was locked entirely on the young woman standing in front of him. Now that he looked closely, he noticed things he had not seen before. Her eyes, the shape of her face, even the way she stood with quiet determination. Something about her felt disturbingly familiar. What did you say your mother's name was? He asked again. Nina Bennett, she said firmly. My mother is Rachel Bennett. The name landed heavily in the air between them. Marcus ran a hand through his hair as memories began pushing their way into his mind. He remembered Rachel clearly now. They had met in their final year of high school. She was kind, strong-willed, and far more grounded than he had been back then. While he spent most of his time talking about business ideas and dreams of success, Rachel had always reminded him to slow down and enjoy life. They had been inseparable for nearly 2 years until one day she disappeared. No explanation. No goodbye. Just gone. Marcus had searched for her at first, asking friends, checking places she used to visit. But eventually, he convinced himself she had simply decided to move on. He had buried the pain beneath ambition, building the empire that eventually made him famous. And now suddenly her name was standing in front of him inside a crowded restaurant, claiming to be his daughter. That cannot be right, he muttered. Nina tilted her head slightly.
Why not?
Marcus's voice sharpened. Because Rachel would have told me if she had a child. Nina's expression hardened. She tried. Marcus looked up sharply. What do you mean she tried? Nina took a slow breath before answering. She came to see you once. Marcus blinked.
When?
When she found out she was pregnant. The word struck him like a shock. He felt the air leave his lungs. That is not possible. Nina continued calmly, though there was clear emotion beneath her voice. She went to your family's house. She said she waited outside for nearly an hour before someone finally spoke to her. Marcus's brow furrowed. Who? Your father. The mention of his father sent a chill through him. His father had been a powerful businessman, strict, controlling, and obsessed with reputation. What did he say? Marcus asked quietly. Nina's eyes darkened. He told her she was not welcome. He told her that if she tried to ruin your future with a story about pregnancy, he would make sure she regretted it. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. He stared at her in disbelief. My father would not. He did, Nina interrupted. The firmness in her voice made him stop. She was scared, she continued. She was only 18. She had nowhere to go and no one willing to believe her. Marcus's mind raced. If this was true, then everything he believed about Rachel leaving him was wrong. She said she waited for you to come home. Nina added softly. But your father told her you did not want to see her. Marcus clenched his fists slowly. My father said that? Nina nodded. She believed him. Marcus suddenly felt a wave of anger building in his chest. Anger mixed with confusion and regret. For 20 years, he had believed Rachel abandoned him. But what if the truth was the opposite? What happened after that? He asked quietly. Nina looked down for a moment before answering. She left town. And you? I was born a few months later. Marcus lowered himself back into the chair as if his legs could no longer support his weight. You are saying she raised you alone? Nina nodded. She worked 2 jobs most of the time, sometimes 3. A few nearby customers were still listening, stunned by the unfolding conversation. Nina continued. She cleaned houses, worked in diners, did whatever she had to do to keep us afloat. Marcus felt something unfamiliar pressing against his chest.
Guilt.
But she never hated you, Nina added. Marcus looked up slowly. What? She always told me you were a good man once. The sentence hurt more than any accusation. Once, he repeated quietly. Nina met his gaze. She said you had dreams of changing the world, that you were kind and hopeful. She gestured around the restaurant. But when I saw you tonight, her voice trailed off. Marcus knew exactly what she meant. The arrogant billionaire shouting at a waitress. The man who had just tried to destroy her job. I searched for Rachel for a while after she disappeared, he said defensively. I thought she just left. Nina studied him carefully. Did you search for long? Marcus did not answer because the truth was painful. He had stopped searching once his business career began taking off. Ambition had taken over everything. Nina slowly placed something on the table. An old photograph. Marcus looked down. It showed a younger version of himself standing beside Rachel at a park. They were both laughing, the sun in their hair. He remembered that day perfectly. You gave that to her, Nina said. Marcus's voice was barely audible.
Yes.
Nina crossed her arms again. She kept it all these years. Marcus stared at the photo, his thoughts spinning. Then he looked back up at her. You expect me to believe you are my daughter because of a necklace and an old photo? Nina did not flinch. No, she said calmly. Then she leaned slightly closer to him. I expect you to believe it because when you look at me, you already know it might be true. Marcus opened his mouth to respond, But no words came out, because deep down, something inside him had already begun to realize the terrifying possibility. And if it was true, then the worst part was not that he had a daughter he never knew about. It was that the first thing he had done after meeting her was humiliate her in front of an entire restaurant. For several long moments, Marcus Devereaux could not bring himself to speak. The elegant restaurant around them slowly returned to life, the clink of glasses, quiet conversations, the soft jazz drifting through the room. But at table 7, time seemed frozen. Marcus stared at the objects lying on the table. The silver charm, the old photograph. His chest felt tight. Across from him, Nina Carter stood calmly, her posture straight, her expression steady. But there was something behind her eyes now. Years of quiet pain. Questions that had waited too long for answers. Marcus leaned back slowly in his chair and ran a hand across his face. "This does not make sense," he muttered. Nina did not react.
Does it not?
She asked quietly. Marcus shook his head, frustration creeping into his voice. "If Rachel had been pregnant, she would have told me." "She tried," Nina replied. The words landed harder this time. Marcus looked up sharply. "You already said that." "Yes," Nina said calmly. "And you did not believe me." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The manager stood a few feet away, pretending to rearrange a nearby table, but clearly listening. Several customers had stopped pretending not to watch. Marcus looked down at the photograph again. He remembered that day vividly. The park, the sun, Rachel laughing beside him. Back then, everything had seemed simple. "Why did she not come find me again?" he asked quietly. Nina's expression hardened slightly. "Because your father made sure she would not." Marcus's jaw tightened. "My father is dead," he said sharply. "That does not change what he did." The words hung in the air. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So your mother just disappeared and raised you alone for 20 years? He asked. Nina nodded. She worked wherever she could. Cleaning houses, working in diners, sometimes 2 jobs at once. Marcus swallowed. The image of Rachel, young, bright, full of life, clashed painfully with the picture Nina was painting. "And she never tried to contact me again?" he asked. Nina studied him carefully. "Do you know what it feels like to be turned away by someone powerful?" she asked quietly. Marcus did not answer. "She believed you did not want her," Nina continued. "That you had chosen your future over her." Marcus's chest tightened. "That is not true." "But she did not know that," Nina replied. Silence returned. Marcus stared at the table, his mind racing through memories he had not touched in decades. Finally, he spoke again. "I did look for her," he said. Nina tilted her head. "For how long?" Marcus did not answer because the truth was embarrassing. Not long enough. His business had started growing shortly after Rachel disappeared. Opportunities came. Investors. Success. And slowly he stopped searching. Nina seemed to understand the silence without needing an explanation. "That is what I thought," she said quietly. The words stung more than an accusation would have. Marcus looked up at her. For the first time since the confrontation began, his voice softened. "I did not know," he said. Nina crossed her arms.
"But you know now."
He nodded slowly.
"Yes."
His eyes drifted back to the necklace. He remembered buying it from a small jewelry shop near their school. It had cost almost all the money he had at the time. "I gave that to her the night before graduation," he murmured. "She never took it off," Nina replied. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. The guilt pressing against his chest felt heavier by the second. When he opened them again, he looked directly at Nina. "So what now?" he asked quietly. Nina did not hesitate. "That depends on you." Marcus leaned forward. "Where is she?" The question carried a mixture of hope and fear. Nina studied him carefully, searching his face. "You want to see her?"
she asked.
Marcus almost laughed at the question.
"Yes." "Why?"
"Because I need to know the truth," he replied. Nina's expression did not change. "That is not a good enough reason." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "You humiliated me tonight," she said calmly, "before you even knew who I was." Marcus winced slightly. "I know. And now suddenly you want to play the role of father." Her words were sharp, but not angry. Just honest. Marcus sat up straighter. I am not asking you to forgive me, he said. I do not deserve that yet. The honesty surprised even the manager, who glanced over nervously. Marcus continued. But if Rachel really raised you alone because of something my family did, then I owe both of you more than an apology. Nina watched him carefully. And what exactly do you think you owe us? Marcus answered without hesitation. The truth. For a moment, Nina did not respond. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Then she spoke quietly. My mom is sick. Marcus froze. What? She has been sick for a while, Nina said. The words hit him harder than anything else that night. What kind of sick? He asked. Nina hesitated. Doctors say it is treatable, but the treatment is expensive. Marcus stared at her. And she has been handling that alone, too. Nina nodded. Marcus slowly pushed his chair back and stood. This time, his movement was not angry or arrogant. It was purposeful. Take me to her, he said. Nina studied him for several seconds. You are serious? I have never been more serious in my life. The tension in the room felt different now. Less explosive, more uncertain. Nina finally reached down and picked up the necklace from the table. She placed it gently back around her neck. Then she looked at him. If you are lying, or if you are just doing this to ease your conscience. Marcus shook his head. I am not. She held his gaze for another long moment. Finally, she said quietly, then finish your dinner. Marcus blinked. What? Nina allowed the faintest hint of a smile. You are still a customer. Even Marcus could not help letting out a quiet breath of disbelief. And for the first time that night, the tension between them shifted into something else. Something uncertain, but hopeful. The drive across the city felt longer than it should have. Marcus sat in the back seat of his car, staring out the window as the glittering skyline slowly gave way to quieter streets and older apartment buildings. Nina sat beside him in silence. For the first time since their confrontation at the restaurant, neither of them had much to say. Marcus's mind was racing. 20 years of unanswered questions, buried memories, and a life he had built without knowing the truth. He glanced briefly at Nina. Now that he knew what he was looking for, the resemblance was impossible to ignore. Her eyes, the shape of her smile, even the stubborn determination in the way she held herself. It was like looking at pieces of the past he had once loved. Here, Nina said quietly. The car slowed in front of a modest apartment building. It was not run down, but it was far from the luxurious world Marcus was used to. The paint on the walls had faded, and the small balcony railings showed signs of age. Marcus stared at the building for a moment. She lives here? He asked softly. Nina nodded. For the past 8 years. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. He owned houses across the city, homes that overlooked lakes, properties he barely even visited, and Rachel had been living here. The car stopped. Neither of them moved immediately. Finally, Nina opened the door.
Come on, she said.
Marcus stepped out onto the sidewalk. For a moment, he felt strangely nervous, something he had not experienced in years. Boardroom negotiations, billion-dollar deals, public interviews. None of them had ever made his heart race like this. They walked toward the entrance. The hallway inside smelled faintly of detergent and old wood. Nina climbed the stairs slowly.
3rd floor, she said.
Marcus followed. Each step felt heavier than the last. At the top of the stairs, Nina stopped in front of a small apartment door. For a moment, she hesitated. Marcus noticed. What is it? He asked. Nina looked at him carefully. She does not know you are coming. Marcus swallowed. That is probably for the best. Nina knocked gently. A few seconds passed. Then they heard footsteps. The door opened. Standing in the doorway was Rachel Bennett. Time had changed her, but not as much as Marcus expected. Her hair, once long and dark, now held strands of silver. Her face carried the quiet marks of years spent working hard and worrying too much. But her eyes were the same, strong, kind, and unmistakable. At first, she only looked at Nina. Hey, sweetheart, Rachel said softly. You're home late. Then her gaze shifted. She saw the man standing behind her daughter. The words died on her lips. For a moment, she simply stared. Marcus felt the world around him go silent.
Rachel, he said quietly.
Her eyes widened. The color drained from her face. For a few seconds, she looked as if she might collapse. Marcus, she whispered. He nodded slowly.
It is me.
Nina stepped aside, allowing the two of them to face each other fully. Neither of them spoke. 20 years of distance stood between them. Finally, Rachel found her voice.
How
are you here? Marcus glanced briefly at Nina. She found me. Rachel looked at her daughter, confusion crossing her face.
What?
Nina crossed her arms gently. Long story. Rachel looked back at Marcus. Her expression was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something else he could not quite name. After all these years, she said softly. Marcus took a careful step forward.
I did not know, he said.
Rachel frowned.
Know what?
Marcus hesitated. Then he said the words that had changed everything. That you were pregnant. The room fell silent. Rachel's breath caught. Slowly, she looked at Nina, then back at Marcus. Her voice barely came out. You mean you really did not know? Marcus shook his head.
No.
Rachel closed her eyes briefly, as if the weight of 2 decades had suddenly shifted. All this time, she whispered. Marcus's voice was filled with regret. I thought you left me. Rachel let out a small, sad laugh.
And I thought you rejected me.
They stared at each other. Two people whose lives had been shaped by a lie neither of them had chosen. Finally, Rachel looked again at Nina. Her voice trembled slightly. You told him? Nina nodded. He deserved to know. Marcus looked at Rachel with a seriousness he had not shown in years. I should have been there, he said quietly. For both of you. Rachel did not answer immediately. She simply studied his face, as if trying to recognize the boy she once loved inside the man standing in front of her. Finally, she stepped aside from the doorway. You might as well come in, she said softly. Marcus stepped into the small apartment. The place was simple but warm. Family photographs sat on a shelf. Most of them showed Nina growing up. Marcus felt another wave of emotion hit him. 20 years of moments he had missed. Rachel closed the door behind them. For the first time since he had arrived, the three of them stood in the same room. An unfinished family, but no longer strangers. Later that night, Marcus stood near the door, preparing to leave. He turned back toward them. I will come by tomorrow morning, he said. Nina nodded. Rachel walked him to the door. For a moment, they stood there in silence. Thank you for coming, she said softly. Marcus shook his head. Thank her. Rachel followed his gaze. She is stubborn, she said with a small smile. Marcus smiled. She gets that from you. Rachel laughed quietly. For the first time in 20 years, the sound felt like a beginning. Marcus stepped into the hallway and paused. Success was not measured by money, he finally understood. It was measured by the people who stood beside you. Now, after 20 lost years, he had a chance to build the one thing he had never truly had before. A family